On this, the Halloween edition of Raspberry Fields Forever, we take a look at one of the most iconic horror films of all time, Friday the 13th. There may not be a hockey mask, but there is a young, hot Kevin Bacon.
Oh, let's pick these berries.
Join us on a journey as we frolic through fields of filmmaking follies. Join us on this week's episode of Raspberry Fields Forever.
You suck. What's up, everyone? Jesse Rodden here with the Halloween edition of Raspberry Fields Forever. Welcome, everyone. Happy Halloween to you. I'm with my co-host, as always, Mr. Kieran Gibbs. Kieran, how you doing there, buddy?
I am okay. I have in my hand, for those who are listening, a Dream World limited edition Coca-Cola, zero sugar, because I am what I like to call a diet soda aficionado, because I do consume a lot of diet sodas and I do not like the term recovering alcoholic. So,
okay. So you're just going to keep that on hand for the remainder of the episode. We're just going to hear just like random gulps throughout. Is that how it's going to happen?
Gulps and belches, my friend. Gulps and belches.
Excellent.
How are you, though?
Man, I'm doing good. Working on our next project. I know that me and you both have been working on our next project. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on and stuff, because that comes with the plugs, not drugs portion of the episode. But big things are happening, so I'm excited about that. And I actually enjoyed the movie that we watched this week. Again, this is the second time that we've come across a movie that, honestly, I don't know how it made this list. This and The Nude Bomb. Like, I think both of them are great movies. And not to mention Friday the 13th kind of sparred an entire generation of slasher flicks and camp horror. I mean, this is where we got that phrase from, is camp horror. It's because of Friday the 13th. So, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to talk about it today.
I am also excited to talk about it, as I did also enjoy it. But whereas I didn't actually genuinely understand why The Nude Bomb was on the Razzies Worst Of list, I can, from a snooty 70s filmmaker perspective, see where Friday the 13th might be on said list, but we will get into that. And as we said, we are going to be covering the original, the OG, the primordial, the beginning, the nexus point, the first, no gimmicks, Sean Cunningham's Friday the 13th from 1980. Jesse, initial thoughts?
Love it. This kind of sparked, like I said, an entire generation of films. I mean, how many Friday the 13th films have been made now? It's been since 1980 and we're in 2022. So, I mean, that tells you how long these movies have been around. And they've gotten better. They've also gotten worse. So, and that's another thing I guess I'm taking a perspective from, is because I've watched so many Friday the 13th movies, Kieran. I'm a big horror movie buff anyways, but I've watched so many of the Friday the 13th that, like, even though this one is not great, it's still better than some of the other ones. Like, I'm sure we will get into them later on, but once we get into like Jason X and Jason Takes Manhattan, it's it gets out there, man. But at least those actually have something to do with Jason.
It's interesting that you mentioned that viewpoint, because conversely, this is the first fully Voorhees property I've ever seen. The only other Jason property I had seen before this was Freddy versus Jason. That's the only other Friday the 13th lore I had ever watched in its entirety. So I'm coming at it from the completely just blank perspective of where I haven't seen 2 through 13, X, Jason Goes to Hell, that sort of thing. So I'm excited to see where our viewpoints will coalesce in this journey through these Raspberry Fields we go.
So before we get started, though, and we move into our next segment, I do want to ask you, since you watched Freddy vs. Jason and you've kind of know a little bit about the Friday the 13th lore, did you have any idea that this movie didn't have Jason in it?
The only reason that I knew that is because the Friday the 13th lore was completely explained to me at a lunch table when I was in the 5th grade by a kid named Travis. I just distinctly remember that day. And so I did know, yes, that Jason doesn't show up until the third movie, or the hockey mask doesn't show up until the third movie, rather. And Jason's in the second one, or at the end of the first one. Spoilers, but he told me that at that particular day. So I did know that, but that also comes with the territory of reviewing such a famous, iconic property. You tend to know the twists before they even happen. Like I hadn't seen Psycho till I was 15, but the shower scene, for instance.
Right. And it's not necessarily the ending getting spoiled because, I mean, let's be honest, this movie is fairly old at this point. But it's more of the whole lore, and everybody, whenever anybody thinks of Friday the 13th, the first thing that comes to mind is Jason and that hockey mask and the machete and all of that. And it's pretty much all missing in this first movie. Like you said, Jason does kind of show up at the very end, but even that was shoehorned in there. We'll get into that later on. So I guess it's time we move into our next segment. Don't you think there, Kieran?
Well, yes, but before we get to that, I just wanted to compare. It's a bit of a Family Matters situation. I guess Jason Voorhees was the Urkel of this situation. because it was supposed to be a heartfelt family show about a police officer in Chicago and his family, and then this fucking nerd in a hockey mask shows up.
Hey, I like it. I'll roll with it.
But yes, I am ready for our first portion of the show.
Excellent, which is God Save the Screen. Ow! God save the screen! Oh! I gotta get better at that. I need to get some like honey and
the trick is to rub Vaseline all the way down your throat.
I thought it was semen. Anyways.
I was trying to take the softer, like, oh, Vaseline, whatever could he mean? And then you just went ahead with the rim shot, you motherfucker.
I don't think we've started this segment off any better. In God Save the Screen, we like to talk about what we call the meat and potatoes of the story. We like to get to the heart of it. We talk about the plot from beginning to end. We'll talk about the points that don't make sense, and we'll probably get excited from time to time and jump around from time to time, but we promise that we will try to keep it contained and keep it flowing as much as possible. So this one starts out, I guess, at Camp Crystal Lake. It looks like it's going to be a teen campfire kind of a Wet Hot American Summer type movie, which Wet Hot American Summer actually came out way later than this, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about.
The year is 1958. They're singing. It's like 9:00 at night. It's pitch black outside. It's this group of counselors among these kids, and we're singing a gospel song. I cannot recall the gospel song that they are singing, but what I have in my notes here is, because we focus on two camp counselors, the man with the guitar, whose name is Barry, and then the woman next to him, whose name is Claudette. They're giving each other fuck me eyes during this Christian song because we are artists and this is a horror movie. God damn it!
Wasn't the song Jesus loves me, yes he do?
I don't think it was that. It was because I was also raised in a pretty Christian manner, and I know they all kind of blend together, the youth pastor acoustic praise songs. That's why I'm having a hard time recalling it exactly. Because there's some trust in chariots, there's awesome God, there's hallelujah.
And you get it in relation to this film. They're kind of setting it up like these camp counselors are supposed to be innocent and be all Christian-y and stuff like that, which helps us in where we're leading with it. So
yeah, these horrors are so dead, especially you, Barry.
Why do you have a fixation with anybody named Barry on this podcast? Anybody named Barry, you're just immediately like, fuck you, Barry.
Okay. Barry was a real guy last time. And he made that shit kicker movie. So there's the reason I have a problem with that Barry. I have a problem with this Barry because he is a caricature.
Okay, that's fair.
So Barry and Claudette finish this praise session, and they adjourn to this attic sort of situation in like a cabin, and they start making whoopee, and we see it's basically, you can compare it basically to the opening of Halloween, except the guy hasn't left this time. We get a POV shot of someone walking up on them, and the POV after busting them, and they're like, oh, we weren't doing anything, just rustling themselves back together. They get killed in this very sort of campy, low budget POV shot of like, oh, here's the stab. I'm going to approach you, and then you're going to scream. And then we cut to what, 30 years later, 25 years later, something like that. It's 1979 and 1980 after these two teenagers are killed.
It's present day at that point.
Yes.
And and then we have that wicked cool opener for the time, because I mean, the whole Friday the 13th coming in and then smashing the glass and stuff, that was pretty cool for the time. And it's something that I always remember about this movie for whatever reason. I'm like, that's the movie that did that.
Yeah, and they continued that trope. Well, didn't they do that in every movie? They had to have done it with 3, because that was a 3D one, right?
Yeah, they did that for a few of them. I think they did break away from it. Then we get a young woman named Annie, which is played by Robbie Morgan, enters a small diner and asks for directions to Camp Crystal Lake because she is going to be a camp counselor at Camp Crystal Lake. That's whenever I think we actually meet Ralph for the first time. Our crazy old man who's, that stereotype, the old man that's just like, you shouldn't go there. It's haunted. You're going to die. And just foreshadowing everything and giving it away. I'm sorry. I'm just going to lay it down right now that if I'm going anywhere and an old man, as I'm getting close to the place, tells me I shouldn't go there, I'm just not going to go.
Yeah. And I believe that this is the first instance where I can think of anyway, where that sort of archetype shows up, because, it's been parodied, honestly, since then. There's this very famous South Park character that's just like, you don't want to go down that road there. Like it's who they base that on. And Annie, to me, because Annie's just sort of this wistful hippie walking through America, seemingly Forrest Gumping her way to this camp that she's supposed to be counseling, because she's just randomly asking for rides. Like, I have it written down in my notes, God, I fucking hate the 80s. This woman deserves to die, because she just walks into a random diner and just starts talking to random people. And before she starts talking to said random people, and I wanted to give her shit for this, there's a dog outside and she has a random conversation with the dog. Like, yes, you're a pretty girl, aren't you? Can you tell me where the nearest ride might be, having an actual conversation? And I want to ridicule her for that, because it's fucking ridiculous. But then I remembered yesterday my neighbor's dog was outside and I spent 4 minutes talking to her. So I can't exactly give her too much shit. But again, she asked these strangers, total strangers, for a ride to Camp Crystal Lake, where she's supposed to be a counselor. And it leads me to ask, how did you get the job if you didn't have the means of transportation to get there? And the old guy, Ralph, who's the crazy one, who's like, you're doomed. The guy who seemingly waved Ralph off, he's this big old burly fella, gives Annie a ride, not even all the way to the camp, because we learned that Annie, I think I mentioned earlier, Annie is a camp counselor, because they're going to reopen Camp Crystal Lake. Mm-hmm. And she is coming to work the staff before the campers show up. It's her and some of the characters we would later meet. And so he's driving her, and then he's telling her about kind of the stuff that happened at Camp Crystal Lake. They say that the camp is cursed, and that anybody that goes there ends up getting hurt or killed or what have you. And then Annie walks a little bit longer and then hitches a ride in the Jeep, right? Yes, but before we get ahead of ourselves, when she's riding with the guy, he mentions that specifically that a little boy drowned in 56, 2 teens were murdered in 58. That's the teens at the beginning. And then there were several fires, and he drops her about halfway next to a cemetery, which isn't on the nose at all. And in between her hitching her next ride, we cut over to the camp, and we meet Steve Christie, who is the guy who bought the camp and has been renovating it seemingly for the past year or so. And when we meet Steve Christie, sir, may I describe to you the accoutrement that he has on his wardrobe? Yes, please. So we are introduced to him. He's hammering something, just generic 1980s construction film stuff. He is wearing homemade cutoff shorts of denim jeans. They're Wrangler grippers, so they're not mobile at all, but he made them mobile by cutting them up to his thighs. Timberland-esque work boots that are worn to hell with red rope socks and Santa socks. That's it. Yeah, he looks like if the Brawny Man and John Oates had a baby. The thing that I can't get over is, because he's rocking the whole mustache Flanders accoutrement, but I just can't get over the Santa socks because they're red socks with white, because there's no other way I know how to describe them than Santa socks, nips out and just hitting on everybody. It's absolutely insane. And when he's fixing these things, the rest of the cast of characters, because so far we have Annie, who is on her way to camp right now. We have Steve, who owns the camp. And then we have the rest of the counselors who seem to pull up at the same time.
Yeah, they all kind of arrive together and know each other, which is super convenient.
At least 3 of them know each other.
Yeah.
We're introduced to Ned, Jack, Bill, Marcy, Brenda, and Alice. And fun fact, Jack is played by a young Kevin Bacon.
And this was probably one of the first things I ever saw Kevin Bacon in. I mean, because I'm younger than this movie, I imagine that I probably saw him in something else like Footloose or Tremors first, but this is probably the youngest I ever remember seeing Kevin Bacon. He may have been in other things, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I do believe this was definitely his big break. And just the thing I can't shit on this movie for being generic, because it did kind of create the generic standards, because there wasn't necessarily a movie before this that we had. So I can say oh, it's the typical archetype, so it's boring, but it kind of created this archetype. It has Ned, who's a piece of shit sociopath who deserves to die from the get-go, because he's just immediately making bad jokes. And since, they're out in the wilderness, he's wearing Indian headdresses and shit, and just culture. Because I can take general assholery, but just anyway, yeah, whatever. Sorry, I'll just I'm hitting my Larry David mode right there. Could you tell?
It's not Neil Diamond in blackface, so
marginally. And Jack, who's just a standard pretty boy, Kevin Bacon with his perfect irregular nose. Is it Bill or Phil?
I believe it's
Bill. It's Bill. Bill, who's just your standard horror movie nice guy. Brenda and Marcy, who are somewhat interchangeable, but Brenda doesn't have any active ties to one of the boys, but Marcy is banging Jack, I believe. And then Alice, who is sort of the final girl archetype, the sort of prim and proper Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, what have you. So jot all that down, because we're just going to say their names and you better understand which characters they are. A little table of context for you right there. So everybody meets each other. We see everybody's problematic patterns because, again, Ned's just being kind of a dick the whole time. And I cannot stress this enough. Steve is just chilling there, nips fucking out in front of these barely not minors. They're seemingly 18, 19 years old, and he's clearly in his fucking 30s. Just hey, babe, look at my burly chest, watching me hammer this stump. You want to go have some weird, hairy 80s sex?
Well, yeah, isn't he touching one of the girls on the face and stuff?
It's later when they're just randomly setting something up, building the camp, what have you. It's Alice, the Jamie Lee Curtis sort of final girl type. He just weirdly caresses her face.
Yeah.
Seemingly they had a thing earlier, which if they have history, she's maybe 18, which I Googled it. She was 25 when they shot this, but it still looks weird. Seemingly they have history. So, which isn't revisited at all. So I think that guy just wanted to maybe feel some lady's face. Who knows?
You're probably right.
I want to feel a lady's face sometimes, but I want it to be consensual, you see.
Which makes sense. You want it to be. Yeah. Anyways.
Consensual face lady rubbing.
Consent is sexy.
Yeah, it very much is.
I think that's actually whenever we get our first look at a machete. I forgot there is a machete in this film.
We've associated with, much like the hockey mask, which doesn't show up until Friday the 13th, part 3. We've associated it with Jason, but he doesn't use it until much later. I don't even think he used it in the second one.
No, he uses an axe.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But it's very clearly stated on the Friday the 13th poster, the iconic black one with the silhouette of the killer. They're clearly holding a camping knife, sort of a Bowie knife situation. Maybe not quite as big, but that's mainly what they do the kills with. But yeah, I have it written down in my notes. Oh shit, machete, because as they're getting settled into the bunks, I believe it's Bill, comes in with a machete because there is a snake in the cabin. And I believe that they just straight up killed this snake, because they shot this snake just basically getting chopped into thirds. And I'm this movie's really cheap. And that looks really authentic. So I think they just shot a snake getting murked on camera.
Probably. And this is during a time that they could get away with that. And actually, I mean, if this came out in 1980 and it was presumably shot in 1979, one thing to keep in mind too is that because these guys are 18, 19 years old, it's completely illegal to drink. They didn't change the legal drinking age to 21 until 1981. So
those damn moms against drunk driving.
yeah.
There's specifically one period that I missed the 80s, which of course I wasn't fucking around, but it's when I'm sitting in like a public establishment with my friends and I just want to smoke a cigarette. That's about the only time I missed the 1980s because you could smoke everywhere.
Yeah. It was until like 2010 here in Texas that you could smoke inside of a Waffle House in certain areas. And man, so nice. I don't smoke anymore, but
the dream.
I know, right? We're way off topic here.
It's fine. It's content. But we break away from the campers because they're just kind of doing miscellaneous setting up camping ground things. We get these various sort of voyeur shots of all of them. Somebody's watching. But we go back to Annie in a very distinct green Jeep, which will play a factor in the rest of the story.
Yes, exactly. Because she gets in the Jeep and we're playing this, oh, we can't see who the driver is game. And this Jeep is just speeding through the woods. And at a certain point, they pass the sign for Camp Crystal Lake. And then that's when Annie starts to get a little bit worried. And she ends up jumping out of the car. So funny fact, if you go on to Netflix, you can go, there's an episode of The Movies That Made Us. And there's an episode on Friday the 13th, and they had Robbie Morgan on there. And she talked about playing the character of Annie, and they basically had her walking and running everywhere she went. And she was kind of her own little stunt person. Like whenever she jumped out of that moving Jeep, she jumped out of that moving Jeep into that ditch. Fortunately, she came out, relatively unscathed. And then we get to the point where she's kind of limping through the woods. She's just running and running and running. Poor Annie. She's like the damn hobbits running to her death.
No, exactly. She bails out of this Jeep when she realizes that she's in danger, and she starts being chased through the woods by this unseen figure. And that's the gimmick throughout the entire movie, is we maybe see like the lower half of it with the hand and the knife, but it's got like gloves on and you can't really, it's sort of a shape situation. But even then with the shape, you have the Michael Myers mask. There's no mask even. And something I like about this movie is very much so like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween before it, it's very low budget, and it's very pioneering in how to use that low budget in order to sort of inspire fear. And so it's these really just sort of disjointed, very unorganized, very shaky, very grainy chase sequences through the woods. But finally, the killer catches Annie on a tree and slits her throat in a very, very campy fashion, because like it's clearly a fake throat and fake makeup, but that kind of adds to the magic of it. So Annie is dead at this point. We have our third dead slut of the movie. Annie, that's unfair. Annie had not exhibited any dumb slut behavior, but there is frequent dumb slut behavior in this film by basically everybody.
Well, she just had dumb behavior. Like, who the fuck is just walking through a town asking for rides places? Like, she was. I wouldn't want to say that anybody was asking for it. She wasn't asking for it, but come on.
I hate to say the term victim blame because this character was written to be stupid. But you kind of want to give him a little bit of leeway because it's not the age of the internet, and maybe people were a little bit more innocent and a little bit more trusting, like, oh, and this is the way things have to be because I don't have a cell phone, what have you. But even then, don't talk to strangers.
Right.
And if this person hasn't said a word the entire time, even when they picked you up and they've been driving like a maniac, maybe things are a little fucked up.
This movie really excels with one thing, and that is their level of gore. They have just the right amount to me. It's not like overbearing like a Hostel type movie, but it's not, leaving it up to the imagination like a Psycho or a Halloween, It's somewhere right there in between, and it's a good spot because a lot of the effects that they used worked. Like the slitting of Annie's throat really looked good. It took that brief second of like almost like a breather before the blood actually started pumping out of it, but it worked. And so another interesting fact that I found on that documentary is how they made the blood. It was actually like Kodak ink fluid, like for a film camera, and some dye and something else. But anyways, it ended up being almost toxic.
I'll tell you what makes me lose my eyesight in this movie: the amount of boobs in it. Am I right? Because next we cut to a bunch of people basically just trying to fuck. I have to do another fit check at this point because Alice, the again prim and proper sort of one, she goes to talk to Bill separately, and I mentioned earlier that Bill's sort of the nice guy. Bill is wearing white fucking jeans, red suspenders with no fucking t-shirt, and that's it. I don't even think he's got shoes on at this point because he's painting something. And I get it. You don't want to like wear a shirt when you're painting and you wear something white because you're painting white. But what is with the suspenders? Just red and white. He looks like a member of Bevo's the fucking UT thing. Devo.
But yeah, it seems like, and it kind of makes sense with this movie, but you can pretty much have your actors wear anything, and they did. They just wore whatever the hell they wanted. And especially Bill, he just, he was wearing the Indian headdress and a diaper there for a minute. And that was probably something he just found on set one day and just went with it.
There's another interaction that happens. It's between Ned and Marcy. Marcy's doing something at the archery range because, it's a campground and kids are going to do archery and shit. Ned launches a whole ass arrow at this fucking lady's head. And not only that, he's wearing, again, a headdress and starts hooting and hollering in the most sort of like, offensive way to in the most offensive way to Native American people, just doing that, that sort of shit. And I was like, sir, I can accept attempted murder, but cultural appropriation? Like, are you serious? It's a problematic Sunday and it tastes like shit. But in the grand scale of things, because it's about to pick up after these just sort of different scenes of interactions between different characters that ultimately mean nothing. Mm-hmm. In the grand scheme of people who are about to die, I want him to die soonish. But the ultimate kind of point that you need to get before things actually start happening is that there's a generator at camp, and the generator likes to go out.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and we also get another visit from Ralph.
After we find out that the generator isn't working, or before that, this film runs together. Damn. There's this cop. There's this cop that shows up, and I want to be in the movie that this cop's in, because everybody else is pretty middle of the road, 6 out of 10, just normal conversation. We're waiting for people to get killed. That's the sort of movie we're in. But then this cop rolls up, and he's sort of got this mixture of Clint Eastwood and the T-1000 thing going on. He's just like, hey, what are you guys doing around here? And then all of a sudden these 19, 20-year-olds walk up, and he goes takes a couple of sniffs and goes what'd you just get off the spacecraft, spaceman? He's just speaking super tough and really pulpy. And he's asking them if they're smoking weed and shit, because I want to be in the movie this guy's in, because he's asking about hash, weed, where are you getting it? Get off that spacecraft there, spaceman. That sort of hard-boiled speech. And this guy's in a really cool Paul Thomas Anderson, Quentin Tarantino sort of pulpy shit. I want to see what fucking adventure he's on. But it turns out he's looking for Ralph, who was introduced earlier as the crazy guy who knows something's going on, and nobody's seen him. And the police chief says something super vague but really cool that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I would probably get it tattooed on my ass if I did. And then he drives away on his motorcycle. And we cut to Alice, who's in sort of the kitchen situation, cooking something. And she opens the pantry. And wouldn't you know it, Ralph's just chilling in the fucking pantry.
Yeah.
And he scares the shit out of her.
Scares the shit out of everybody. And then they're just like, oh, well, that must be Ralph that everybody's talking about. Just no more alarmed than that. And they're all a very young age, and there's so many red flags that nobody's paying attention to. And I get that it's a horror movie, but dude, come on with the red flags. And so he presumes to tell them that they're all doomed and just fucks off again. And isn't that the last time that we see Ralph in the movie? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, because he And of the sound bites that have like emerged with this movie, this is one of the more prolific ones. It's probably not the most famous, but it's one of them. Is he's got the bicycle and he just goes off and "You're doomed, doomed," and then he just fucks off. And then we start seeing the perspective of presumably the killer, who's watching everybody because everybody's gathered up at the camp. These are all the important characters. Steve Christie, the guy who owns it, he's fucked off somewhere else that I can't even remember the time. It's not important. We're going to stick at the camp for a while. And people start kind of branching off in their own, like, different sort of situations. And the second half of the movie starts. We cut to a couple of voyeur shots of seemingly the killer watching the camp counselors at the campground because Steve Christie is fucked off to go do something else.
And you know how you know it's the killer, right? And I thought this was actually a pretty ingenious a way of going about it. But if you notice, there's not a very big score in the film. Whenever you're talking about the counselors and stuff like that, there's not a really underlying score to it. And that's how they tell you that the killer is present, is because when they do these voyeuristic shots of someone lurking in the woods or something along those lines, it's underscored with the classic. The whole killer chasing after Annie scene wouldn't work without that, because it just looks like it's a shaky camera following this girl along. And it's because it's underscored with that really creepy score that you really get the sense that it is the killer. We're seeing it through the killer's eyes, which was pretty cool in my book.
Oh yeah, it's become probably, it's at least top 5 most iconic horror sounds like of all time. Like it's immediately identifiable, and it's become just sort of in the public discourse, and like it's undeniable. But after Steve fucks off, this is where the fun begins, because the sort of like, things start to go to shit when Jack and Marcy start having their sort of like romantic sort of, yeah, we're done for working for the day. It's about to rain. Let's go do something super romantic. And you see them just being like super gross coupley, just really annoying. And then something I thought was really cool is the camera does this sort of long pan over. They zoom out of the couple and they get them in a wide shot, and they pan over, and Ned is just kind of sitting looking at everybody longingly. And you almost start to feel bad until you remember he's a sociopath. And he walks into one of the cabins, and then we cut to the other 3 counselors, Bill, Brenda, and Alice, going about their business because it does start to rain, and it starts to rain heavily. So Jack and Marcy, of course, adjourn to one of the empty cabins and proceed to fornicate with one another. And while the storm starts to roll down even heavier, the other 3, Brenda, Alice, and Bill, begin to play strip Monopoly, which, if you're aiming to get naked with members of the opposite sex via games and you're looking to do it in an efficient manner, I do not believe that Monopoly is the medium to do so. Have you ever fucking played Monopoly? It's like 3 hours is the least amount of time I've used in one game. Like, it's not efficient.
That's a short game, man.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you're trying to see some titties, I do not believe that this particular gaming method is going to be your most efficient.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, you ever been mad with a boner, Jesse? Let me ask you that. You ever been mad with a boner? It's fucking it's absolutely astoundingly annoying to be angry with a boner.
I argue that you've never hate fucked somebody, sir.
He takes the lob and he slams it down.
Sorry.
You're absolutely correct. But anyway, when they start fucking in this cabin, Jack and Marcy, that is, something that I was mentioning earlier that I thought was so cool, and this was genuinely probably the most like ingenious reveal, is they're fucking on the bottom bunk in this abandoned cabin. And when they pan to the top, you see Ned's dead body. And this was about 10 minutes earlier when you watch Ned walk into that cabin, and you had kind of forgotten that Ned existed because he's a shitty character. You don't want him on screen anyway. And they circled back to him, and he's dead sitting above him. So we are down 1 counselor, Jesse. Where do we go from here?
Well, they got to smoke some grass.
grass and fornication, death, heretics.
I know, right? I do like the fact that even the good girl is kind of like, yeah, I'll smoke and I'll do this type of stuff. Strip Monopoly, and Brenda remembers that she left her cabin windows open. And as Brenda settles down for bed, she hears a faint childlike voice calling, "Help me," from the woods. And so Brenda walks outside and has like a flashlight. She ventures into the archery range where I guess the killer is at. Someone hits the lights for the archery range and just light it up and blind her. And then Brenda is then killed off screen. And we don't really know what happened to her.
Yeah, and it's pouring down rain when she's out in the archery range. And in the meanwhile, over at the abandoned cabin with Jack and Marcy decides to go use the bathroom, which results in her getting yeeted in the fucking face by an axe.
Yes.
Which is probably, in my opinion, the coolest visual in the movie, because after her and Jack get done fucking, she goes to the bathroom to go to the bathroom, and she's stalked by the faceless killer. And like I said, gets yeeted in the face with an axe. And it's this genuinely cool practical effect where the handle's sticking out and you can see half of the eyeball, and it looks it's clearly her face, but it's blended super well with the other eyeball that's got the axe jammed right into it. It kind of boggles my mind because I think it's super well done. And I think it's a better effect than the murder that occurs to her boyfriend, Jack. And it's probably the most visually iconic murder in all of the first Friday the 13th movie. And it's where the killer is under him while he's smoking a joint on the bed, because marijuana and fornication, heresy, you die. The killer has an arrow sitting under his cot and jams it through his throat, and jams it right through. And it's really cool because like it's needling its way through, like it's twisting, and the blood is coming over top of it. And you see Kevin Bacon die. But personally, I think the axe was a bit of a cooler effect. So now we have gone down from one counselor to 4 counselors, all dead.
And it happens pretty quick too. Like all of them just start dying like one by one by one. But I guess they kind of have to do that because people are going to start asking questions, right? And people are going to start wondering what happened to their friends and everything. But I argue that my favorite death was neither one of those. I mean, the bow and arrow like through the neck thing, that's a good practical effect. And honestly, the practical effects that they used in this movie work, and they would still work today if done right.
They work, but I don't know if they work today.
See, you'd have to change it up a little bit and obviously update, the way you tell that story and the way you angle it and stuff like that. But honestly, I mean, me and you would use that effect in our short film,
Yeah, the only issue I had is just the skin tone of it all, because like, when you have like the head over the neck with that the throat is slit, like it's clearly 2 different tones. That's the only issue I had with it. Right. But then again, I'm sitting in front of a laptop with a broken microphone, so what do I know?
I would argue, honestly, though, that my favorite kill was a kill that was kind of off screen. We didn't see it happen, but it is revealed later on. And that's when I believe it was not Bill.
Steve.
Was he the one that was pinned to the wall? It's the one that's pinned to the wall with all the arrows.
No, it's Bill.
That's Bill, yeah. And I loved that kill. That was awesome. So apparently, though, I just wanted to throw this out there. They actually pinned him, the actual guy, to the wall and put all of those arrows in him, practically. And the one that was like shoved through his eye, they put that patch over his eye to be able to look like an arrow was going through it. And then they covered it in all of that blood. Well, that blood was that fucking toxic chemical, and apparently he lost sight in that eye for 6 months.
Oh God.
Yeah. So fortunately he did not lose his eyesight forever, but yeah, he walked around with only being able to see out of one eye. Yeah, for half the year.
For half a year. The things you do for art, man. So yeah, it's pouring down rain. 4 of the counselors are dead. Everything's going to shit. The power's out, and so people are splitting up. And as you said, Bill ends up getting killed. And Steve Christie comes back during the rain after being at a diner hitting on this old fat lady who was playing some fucking game, might I add. The way she was sweet talking that man, I wish. He comes back, but eventually the killer comes up to him. And something we need to point out is that we get many of these kill shots, not all of them, but many of them are from the straight up point of view of the killer. And you can see the camera walking around as if it was his eyes, or their eyes rather. And when we see them kill Steve, Steve looks up at him and Steve knows him, but then they get stabbed. And the killer proceeds to leave everybody around the camp for Alice, the sole survivor, to find in the pouring rain. And so she's running away from the killer across the archery range, across these different cabins, across through the rain, when finally, seemingly, help comes.
So yeah, this is when we get to the big climactic ending of it. She's finding these dead bodies around the campsite. She's found Bill just fucking pinned to the wall with arrows. And that's one thing that I did question was, okay, I get that she's a killer, but how in the hell did she pin a lifeless body to a wall like that?
Jesse, this could easily be a man or a woman. Don't spoil it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't you spoil it.
She's running around outside, and lo and behold, the Jeep shows up from earlier, the one that had given Annie a ride, and pops out an older woman. Betsy Palmer is the actress's name. And apparently she cusses like a sailor and smokes like a sailor too. But she introduces herself as Mrs. Voorhees. And she seems like she's innocent enough in the beginning and is only there to help her. And she gets her back inside and starts showing her where the bodies are and stuff. And it seems like she's a friend and is going to help. And then she just flips it and gives a bunch of expository dialogue, letting us know who she is and why she's doing what she's doing, because surprise, surprise, she is the killer. And she starts talking about her son, Jason, who drowned back in, I guess, 56, 55. No,
it was 56, I believe.
Yes, it was 56. And the camp counselors were killed in 58.
Yep, because the camp counselors were making love and he drowned. It's something I think that's worth noting. Like you said, it was played by Betsy Palmer, and this movie is not winning any acting awards. I don't necessarily think it deserves to be nominated for Worst Picture like it is in the Raspberry Awards, but it's certainly not winning any Oscars for acting. But something I think needs to be appreciated is the performances by the older character actors in this movie. The younger people are kind of just doing their job. They're there what they're supposed to do. But the older ones, you know, particularly Betsy Palmer, the guy who played Ralph, the officer who's in his own fucking pulp drama, and the waitress who's spitting game to Steve before he gets murked, they're all like putting in 110% effort. And I just think that needs to be acknowledged, because she's, like you said, it was expository dialogue that I think in anybody else's hands would have been kind of boring, but she's sort of weaving this tale because she's going crazy. Because like you said, she appears as a friend, but she starts talking about her son, Jason, who was killed because the camp counselors were making love. And that's kind of the root point of this movie. If you fuck, you're gonna die.
Well, yes. I mean, that's the trope of most horror films, is that if you sin, the ones who sin are the ones who die. And that was the leading trope for the longest of times. And still actually kind of plays today, but, you know, we tend to put a new twist on it in today's horror films, which is a good thing. Honestly, I think that it's been overplayed so many times. But when Mrs. Voorhees turns on Alice and gives all the expository dialogue, she ends up, you know, chasing Alice around the campsite, trying everything she can to kill her. And she pulls out the Bowie knife and tries to kill her in the place. And then I think Alice uses a fireplace poker and like knocks her in the head with it, something like that.
Yep. And we're led to believe that she's incapacitated. And in one of these confrontations, when Mrs. Voorhees is chasing Alice around, and doesn't she have the knife on her like at all times?
Yeah.
So it's just something that I just kind of found really funny. And I know it was for the script, because this portion of the movie is stat padding the movie, because it could have ended in like 10 minutes. Like,
oh yeah. Yeah. This was the Scooby-Doo portion where they're just running around. Just,
you know, boogity boogity, let's go racing. And she's got this knife, but Alice has a gun that she can't find any ammo for, so she's just pointing an empty fucking pistol or pointing an empty rifle, and she has to throw it away. because Mrs. Voorhees is just walking up on her, calling her bluff. She's got this knife, and she just bitch slaps the shit out of her twice. And I just respect that so much, because it's like, yeah, I got this weapon that could kill you in a second, but what do the 5 fingers say to the face, bitch? Slap. Slap. She just fucking, she Dave Schultzes her twice. It's wonderful.
Oh, man. Alice escapes and then runs back to the main cabin and hides in the pantry. Then Mrs. Voorhees brings out the machete. That's right. The machete does come back, and she tries to break open the door and rush in on Alice. So she's trying to do a Shining moment. Here's Johnny, and Alice just cold cocks her upside the head with a frying pan, and then it just leaves her unconscious. So Alice is now heading out towards the lake, which didn't make sense to me. It's like, Mrs. Voorhees left her car running, so you could have just taken the Jeep.
We never see Alice drive, so I'm not making an assumption either way, but just playing devil's avocado here. Maybe Alice doesn't know how to drive because we've never seen her drive.
Well, maybe so, but I mean, if I'm trying to run away from a killer, I don't care.
And risk property damage, Jesse?
Get in a car, Kieran, or get in a canoe.
I withdraw my point. I withdraw. I yield, sir. Okay. I yield.
So that's where we're heading, right? She ends up not going to the Jeep. She ends up going out towards the lake, and I guess is trying to get into a canoe to get away. And of course, Mrs. Voorhees, being the spry older woman that she is, and as fast as Michael Myers, she ends up catching up with her and is just like slamming her head into the sand, just like making her eat it, and she's wielding the machete again and trying to kill Alice one last time. And Alice does get the upper hand on her and ends up getting the machete away from her. And then it's probably one of the cheesiest, but I absolutely love it, decapitation scenes, because it just like the machete barely hits that neck on that dummy and the whole head just comes off. And there's no like blood spurt or anything like that. It's just like meat,
Yeah, it's like somebody broke off the casing of the top half of the sausage.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it took a bite off a ballpark, Frank.
Oh man. And see, and this is again one of those things that I don't understand. So she's dead at this point. Alice has chopped her head off. There's no way she's coming back from this. Why get in the canoe? Even if you don't drive.
It's so the movie can happen, Jesse. It's so the movie can happen.
You say that a lot on this podcast.
It's almost like I'm being fucking ironic.
Anyway, I know you are, but it's just, this is those moronic things in horror movies that has people yelling at the screen going, "Don't go in there."
Yeah, because she didn't even have an oar. That's the thing that fucks with me.
And she's just leaning over the side of it, like just hand in the water and
just doggy paddle.
Yeah. And then it's like, the sad walking away music from the end of the Incredible Hulk series.
Second episode in a row, we're bringing that up.
Yeah, that's true. She's in this canoe and the sun's coming up and the police are, I guess, coming in to the campsite and trying to figure out what's going on. Oh, because I think Steve has made it back, right? He's finally made it back with the police. Because Steve went on a whole...
Steve's dead as fuck.
No, Steve didn't die. Steve's
dead as fuck.
Dude, no, Steve was caught in the... Steve left because he went to go get supplies. He got caught in the rain at the diner. Then on the way back, he broke down and the cop picked him up and brought him to the fucking camp.
Yeah, and then he walked up to the camp and there was that POV shot where she stabs him. He's in his yellow raincoat. He's one of the bodies she finds.
What about the cop?
We also need to notate that we might have watched 2 different cuts of this movie.
Oh, well, that might be true.
Because I watched Friday the 13th uncut.
And I watched the regular one. Yeah, the original.
So there might be a discrepancy there.
Possibly.
But from what I recall, Steve dies. I just believe the cops came to check on the situation.
Okay.
because it was, the next morning and it wasn't raining.
You might be right. Anyways, doesn't matter. We're already at the end of this movie anyways. And this is the part where we get our first spotting of Jason, because she's in this canoe, and then all of a sudden this kid pops up out of the water who looks like Rocky Dennis from Mask.
Oh, he looks a little bit more like the bald guy from the OG Mad Max.
He looks a little bit like, have you ever watched Paradise PD on Netflix? He looks like Dobby. He ends up pulling her under, and even the innocent one doesn't make it out because she smoked grass.
Is that how it ends for you?
Yeah, that's how it ends for me.
Oh, I have an alternate ending.
Oh.
Because the ending on Friday the 13th Uncut was that she wakes up in a hospital and she proceeds to tell the police officers, they're dead. Everybody's dead. Did you find the boy who pulled her under? And the police officer says, no, ma'am, there was no boy. Then spooky music. And then we cut back to the lake, slow shot in on the lake, credits. How does Friday the 13th 2 start?
Oh, gosh.
Because that could have been an insert for Friday the 13th 2. I don't know.
I don't think it was an insert for Friday the 13th 2 because he's big in part 2. Like, he's a big dude.
Research is not a cornerstone of this podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I do apologize.
But yeah, I think they ended up having to do a little bit of I don't know. They just had to take a little bit of leniency with the story and stuff because this one it ends with him being like a little kid still. And in the later ones, he's a grown man. But I think if I remember correctly, it almost ends up like Jaws. Is kind of how it starts. Kids swimming in the lake, and all of a sudden someone gets pulled under, type of thing.
Oh, well, yeah, because mine ends. She wakes up in a hospital bed.
Okay, well, that sounds like there's only difference between the two versions that we came across. Anyways, well, I think that brings us out of the meat and potatoes of this story. Up next, we have the Can't Buy Me Love critic reviews of the day. It's the Can't Buy Me Love reviews of the day. Come on, let's hear them out. Aw, hell nah. In the Can't Buy Me Love critic review of the day, we like to give people who have a differing opinion than we do a chance to have their opinions heard. So we're going to give you a little bit of both because honestly, this movie is both good and bad. So I'm sure we can find a mixture of people who have good reviews and people who have bad reviews for it. So, Kieran, you got something to start us off with today?
Me personally, I felt that Friday the 13th is not even arguably, it's inarguably the most popular movie that we have covered on this podcast. And it's arguably one of the most popular movies of all time, franchise-wise anyhow. So I think there's been plenty of discourse from other people. So for this very special Halloween edition of Raspberry Fields Forever, since this is arguably one of the most popular movies of all time, not just the most popular movie that we're going to cover this season, I would provide my own Can't Buy Me Love critic review of the day. This movie is very important. It's a trendsetter, and it is a pioneer for the slasher genre and horror as a whole. Does that make it good to the modern eye? Not necessarily, but I did have fun. I saw a couple boobs, and it seemed like everybody had a nice time, except for that one guy who apparently lost his eyesight for 6 months. I feel bad for him. 3 stars.
Okay. All right. Well, my personal opinion on it is I love the movie. I think that it started an entire genre of film. I mean, you can't get to Sleepaway Camp. You can't get to a lot of different slasher movies without this being its predecessor. Because yes, Michael Myers was before this, and the Halloween franchise kind of was a staple, but this one also added not only the mystique of a slasher, but had a lot more of the gore aspect to it. It worked on audiences back then because it was such shocking to be able to see this and not just cut away the camera or anything like that. You actually got to see this arrow be stuck through Kevin Bacon's neck. And it holds up. It really does. It, even for its campiness, even for its lackluster casting, and some of its more cheesy parts with the whole doom of it all, it still is something that started an entire franchise that, it still holds up today. Some other people had comments as well. I've got Matt Brunson of the Film Frenzy. He says Betsy Palmer, cast as Mrs. Voorhees, delivers the most embarrassing performance found in any film in the franchise, which I completely disagree with.
No, that's the I rarely invalidate feelings. That's invalid as fuck.
Yeah. I don't understand it. It's a splatty tomato. It's he gave it a 2 out of 10. So he can suck a dick.
You know what? Some people enjoy that. He can't even suck a dick. He can suck an exhaust.
There you go. He can suck start a Harley.
Oh. I can you explain the reference? Can you explain the reference?
Oh, he puts his mouth on a tailpipe and he can just suck it and kick the pistons going.
Oh, I don't know sports.
Oh. Wow.
Did I say sports?
You did say sports.
I meant cars.
You do know a little bit about sports. I'll give you that. You beat me in fantasy this week, asshole.
I wasn't gonna say anything.
Yeah.
But
you started alluding to it, and I figured I just.
Well, no, I said I don't know sports because it was trying to be. It's like I never say I'm bad at geography. I always say I'm bad at geometry, meaning geography, and nobody ever gets that joke. So I should probably stop. It's one of them situations where I just use the wrong word. These are conversations I should have with my therapist. Friday the 13th. Let's go.
And I got one more review for you. This is from Stephen S. He is a super reviewer for Rotten Tomatoes. He just says, classic horror film. It spawned one good sequel and a shitload of bad ones. Seeing young Kevin Bacon here is hilarious, by the way. And he gave it 4 out of 5 stars.
That's about the most. That's probably the most like hinged review that I've heard on this probably series so far. And I agree with it.
I pretty much agree with it too. All right, I think that's enough reviews for the day. I think we're ready to move on to probably one of my favorite segments that we have.
It's the end of the flick as we know it, and I feel pretty okay about it.
And now, for the moment you've been waiting for, it's the end of the flick as we know it! No, seriously, get out. Go on. Get. Shoot.
So it's the end of the flick as we know it. And in this section, we like to talk about anything that's left. We give you a little bit of trivia. We talk about box office numbers. We talk about tomato scores and audience reviews. Whatever we can get our hands on, we'll just bring it to you and let you know a few cool things about this flick.
Yeah, we're essentially just going to kind of wrap this thing up in a nice little package for you and send you on your way. So, Jesse, after seeing this movie for the how manyth time, what'd you think?
Easily one of the better films on this podcast that we'll watch, honestly. I don't think we're going to have another film on here that's going to spark as many sequels as this film did. And I don't think that you can really call this movie a failure when it's made millions and millions, if not billions, when you consider all of the movies together. You know, I would not be surprised if this movie or this franchise was up towards the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars at this point. So, yeah, how can you say that this movie's bad when it's made so much money and people watch it every year for Halloween? It's one of those movies that's a tradition for a lot of people.
I can somewhat agree with that mythos, and in this film in particular, you're correct. But just because something makes a lot of money doesn't make it okay. I present to you Avatar, the blue people, not the Airbender.
You mean Ferngully?
That's what I say. That's exactly what I say. It's fucking blue Ferngully. But anywho, yeah, like I do not, and this might be a hot take for some people, I don't place it above the Nude Bomb personally, but that's just because what I like out of my cinema.
So you're already moving into your sour scale.
No, I was doing an anecdote, Jesse. Don't fucking formulate me. I'm not a goddamn beaker you can place over glass and formula however you like. I'm oscillating at all times. I'm using random words. I think I might have a stroke.
I hate you so much.
Me too, buddy. Me too. But no, Friday the 13th is really, for my personal taste, it's probably not going to take the top spot for me, but I did enjoy it as a film. I didn't like just watch my phone the entire time or wait for it to be over. Well, maybe toward the end there, because it does tend to stat pad toward the end. But like I said, it's real cheap, and that can come across one of, like, there's a few different ways I can come across in cinema. It can either come across really funny, really bad, just genuinely bad, or really earnest, and you just kind of like what they're doing. And it came across that third way, like an Evil Dead or a Halloween. Like, there's a lot of heart in this movie, I think. And I do think that it ultimately has led to positivity in filmmaking culture, because a bunch of people find solace in these movies and they like have a community around them. And I think it's ultimately more positive that it was made. And I do think that probably the Raspberry Awards were a little bit pretentious when they nominated it. I can see somewhat from a technical perspective, but from a film school perspective, you're doing what you can with what you got. It's fucking golden, my friend. You're crafting a sort of tension where you can, and it's again with the cha ha ha, that old rigmarole.
Actually, so here's another funny little tidbit for you. The ch is actually not that. So the composer, when he came up with that little echoing phrase, because Mrs. Voorhees was hearing voices of her son saying, "Kill her, mommy, kill her, mommy, kill her, mommy," he took the first letters of killer and the first letters of mama and put that. So it was ma, 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 ma. That's just a little bit of bullshit trivia for you. That it's another testament to the composer himself and actually coming up with that whole little tag, because it became so synonymous with the Friday the 13th franchise and letting you know that Jason was around the corner, to giving you insight into what Betsy Palmer's or Mrs. Voorhees' mind was in a state of. And you wouldn't get that if it wasn't for the composer just trying something.
Yeah, man. Like, and that's really just, again, a testament to its ingenuity and the world that they were able to craft, and the subsequent licensing phenomenon that they've been able to craft, because there hasn't been a Friday the 13th movie in almost 13 years now, and they've just still been cashing that bank. There is one note I have, though, just me personally. It is hard for me to invest in the terror somewhat, because one of the rules in this movie is that if you're having sex, you're probably going to die. And I don't get laid, so I'd probably be fine.
You'd be the one pulled into the canoe at the end.
Yeah, and then a random Norm from Cheers-esque cop would wake me up in a hospital bed, and I'd have a cute blonde bob. It would be a heck of a time.
Dude, no, that would be the thing, is that because it's like, you know, you're the virgin guy at the end, you get pulled underwater, and instead of like waking up or anything, it'd be that Curb Your Enthusiasm type ending where it just goes to credits and plays the music, and you play for a fucking joke. Like, the virgin didn't make it.
Oh God. I just wanted to sing in the talent show, and they made fun of it. Was it calling Dr. Love by Kiss? Maybe, but I was expressing myself.
Oh man. Another thing about this film is the budget versus what it actually made at the box office. Man, one of these days, I'm hoping that I can have these type of numbers for something. It was a budget of $550,000. Kieran, do you know how much money this movie made?
Oh, I'm going to go in the ballpark of around 20 mil.
Double it.
40.
$40 million.
So that's if my math is correct, that's an 800% return.
Yes. And let's not even talk about the at home video sales, because this was one of those VHS fucking
Bonanza. And that was back when you had to pay like $100 a tape.
really what?
VHS tapes used to be mad expensive, dog.
Well, same thing with Blu-rays. I mean, I remember when Blu-rays used to be godly.
Well, that's why the video store was the thing, because you rent the videos.
Oh yeah.
Because the renting was much cheaper than buying them outright. And then when the DVD came along, it kind of killed that.
Mm-hmm. And Friday the 13th, I actually used to work in video stores. I worked at OK Video in my old hometown, and I also worked at Blockbuster for a little bit. And this was one of those movies that like we had to keep so many copies of, like it just filled up the shelf, and we never really sold it throughout the entire year except for whenever it got time for Halloween. And that's the reason why we had to keep so many copies, was because it would sell out during Halloween. Like this was one of those movies that was just, I was working at Blockbuster in 2010. And even then this movie was selling out at the video stores.
Were you around for the end?
Yes. I closed down my Blockbuster.
You closed down your Blockbuster.
I closed it down. But
what was that like?
It was interesting. It was a lot of like, because we were closing down, they were bringing in inventory that they didn't fucking want from all the other stores, like all of their overstock of all these bullshit movies that nobody wanted. And then we just set up clearance racks, and it was like pennies on the dollar for like all of these movies that were just in like sleeves, the little paper sleeves. Mm-hmm. We didn't even have them in the cases anymore. And then by the time we were getting down to the end, bro, I shit you not, we sold the computers, we sold the safe, we sold the counters, we sold all of the shelves, we sold all of it.
Was it all pocket money?
All of it. No. It wasn't all pocket money. It all went to the business, and you know we had to basically make invoices for a lot of that stuff.
So they were just liquidating everything.
Oh yeah, like getting rid of it all.
I'll be honest, like that sounds just from an artistic perspective depressing as fuck. And me personally, I'm a Pisces, so I would have been crying my fucking eyes out.
The way they kind of threw it up there was that there was, because I was in College Station at the time, and there was actually 3 Blockbusters in College Station, and we were the first one to close down. So they gave us the whole spiel of like, don't worry, we're going to be moving you guys over to the other 2, and this was one of our top stores, but because you guys are in the middle and one of them's over here and the other one's over here, it's better to close you guys down and make people go out to these. So I was over at that new store for like maybe 3-4 weeks, and they're like, well, looks like we're going to be closing down this one. I'm like, I'm out.
Dude, man, it's the fall of an empire. I think we might be experiencing one now, but that's neither here nor there.
I can't wait for the Netflix series. Have you seen the commercials for it?
Oh, is there yes. So we're Blockbuster, yes, I've seen that.
No, the sitcom. So Netflix has bought the rights and is doing a Blockbuster sitcom that is a sitcom set in a fucking Blockbuster with Richard Parks.
Isn't that kind of fucking sadistic?
Yeah, it's kind of sadistic. It's Richard Parks, the Asian guy from Ant-Man and WandaVision and stuff like that. He's playing the manager of the Blockbuster, and his assistant manager is Amy Santiago from Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
That is psycho. Because they essentially murdered a company and like they're playing with its corpse as a toy.
Pretty much.
Jesus Christ.
That series finale doesn't end with Netflix coming in and them having to close down.
Now I'm just, this is a very depressing time. So Friday the 13th sold out a lot, huh?
Friday the 13th sold out everywhere. It was a massive hit. And it made all of the monies. And because it was done on such a small budget with very little producers and very little hands in it, let's just say people made some monies.
Yeah, and the rights have, and since it was such just humble beginnings, the rights have bounced around super like weirdly now, haven't they? Because in the age of like the reboot and IP and like trying to stack up as much IP as possible, that was the whole point of Space Jam. Friday the 13th has been one of those franchises that's been awful quiet because if I'm not mistaken, I think LeBron James's production company tried to pick it up at one point.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
Riff for a minute. I'll try to get confirmation on that.
It was the 18th highest grossing film that year, facing stiff horror competition because also that year was The Shining, Dressed to Kill, The Fog, and Prom Night. And all of those are pretty damn good horror movies. So, yeah, it had some stiff competition. And that's probably leading to why it got nominated for Worst Picture, because this is our first and really only horror movie for the Razzie Awards for 1980. So it was probably their horror addition to that category. I don't know. I'm spitballing there, but it sounds like that would be plausible.
Well, I think it might just be one of them situations where Friday the 13th was just a little bit ahead of its time, where I think The Shining was also in the same boat, but for different reasons. Kind of like now, Jennifer's Body is revered as a very good horror movie, but I distinctly remember when it came out, nobody really liked it and nobody really got it. So I think that might kind of be the issue with Friday the 13th, or why it was viewed as how it was. But yeah, LeBron James's production company attempted to buy the rights in 2018, and they were in talks to be making a new movie. But since the state of the rights are in such just weird limbo, and people have big egos about the movies because there's so many of them, and since there's so many of them, people want different cuts of the pie. They just couldn't get the deal done. That's why it's just kind of been sitting in limbo, because the guy who owns the rights doesn't want to give them up, because he doesn't want to give up his certain slice of the pie, but I don't think he can finance his own project.
Interesting.
So that's why we haven't had a Friday the 13th in a while.
Well, there you go. Before we get to our sour scale, I do have just a couple more just interesting facts that I think are pretty cool. And I just wanted to throw them out there real quick before we get to our sour scale and we get out of here. So the special effects supervisor, Tom Savini, who's actually very well known and in the special effects market for horror films and stuff, he actually performed the arrow shot that narrowly missed Brenda. So that wasn't faked. That was a real shot that was right next to her.
If I'm not mistaken, Tom Savini's the guy who does all the Bray Wyatt's Fiend stuff.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. That's pretty cool. Also, Harry Crosby, the guy who played Bill, you know who his dad is?
Who?
Bing Crosby.
Oh my God. Oh no.
So there you go.
The way and he played Bill?
Yep.
Okay. Because I was about to say, if it was Ned, I'd feel bad for him, because that kid probably got the shit kicked out of him. Bing Crosby is very famous for not being a great dad. So that poor guy got hit a lot.
And then the last thing that I want to throw out there is the MPAA told the producers of Friday the 13th to scale back on the gore for the sequel, since they regretted the amount of gore that had gotten through in the original. And that's why part 2 is a lot less gory. It focuses a lot more on the suspension of disbelief and using your imagination type thing, like Psycho and Halloween did. So not near as much gore in its following movie, but don't worry, they got back to it. It's at a certain point, and it's all the gore, all the sex, all the drugs you can handle. So
it was like when Halloween went away from Michael Myers for Season of the Witch. They thought they were going to go a different direction. Then they're like, oh wait, that's not where the money is. Let's go this way.
Yeah, well, Halloween was actually supposed to be an anthology. It wasn't supposed to be Michael Myers every single time. It was just Michael Myers was so popular from that first film that they had him come back to do Halloween 2. And then from there, it was supposed to be an anthology. And they were supposed to do Halloween 3, Halloween 4. And it had absolutely nothing to do with Michael Myers or that lore. It was just a Halloween horror story. It's kind of like an episode of a movie of American Horror Story every year.
Yeah, it's an anthology. It's like a Twilight Zone situation.
Exactly. I feel like I'm over explaining it to you.
Well, no, there's also people out there who maybe don't know.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I'm saying it for them. I ain't saying it for you.
You know what? Can I get to my sour scale, Daddy?
Okay, you can get to your sour scale.
Thank you for letting me get to my sour scale there. Okay.
How about a kiss?
Controversial. Maybe later. Controversially, I'm still keeping Nude Bomb number one just because of what I like in my movies. I think Nude Bomb is technically done better. The stunt work is most definitely, well, the stunt work is better. The practical effects are questionable because the stunt work in Friday the 13th, rather, they got people hurt. The practical effects, the blood, that's better than it was in Nude Bomb, but I digress. Just from what I like in my movies. Friday the 13th, 2. Close to. Very close to. Xanadu is going to be sitting at number 4. Just because the more I think about it, the less I like it. The songs haven't stuck with me as much. At 5, we're going to go Saturn 3 because it's mostly inoffensive to me. And some of the robot stuff's cool. And I think Kirk Douglas has a nice butt. Raise the Titanic, who gives a shit? That is sitting right there comfortably at 8. The Jazz Singer is at 9, and Windows is at 10.
Nice.
Am I missing anything?
I don't think so. I think you pretty much hit it on the head. You did better than I'm going to do because some of these I can't even fucking remember half the time.
I tend to just I'm like the college football bracket. I just reorder every week.
There you go. So I'm going to have to differ from you. I think we've been pretty much very similar on the sour scale up to this point. And I think in the end, our scales are going to be very, very similar. I think where they're going to differ is our number 1. I would have to put Friday the 13th above the Nude Bomb. And it's not even necessarily that I like it better than the Nude Bomb, because I think the Nude Bomb is definitely entertaining. I liked it a lot, but it doesn't have the longevity of a Friday the 13th. There wasn't enough there for people to remember it even to this day. And Friday the 13th is one of those films that not only is it creating a genre, not only is it, is it not deserving of being on this podcast, really? It's something that is legendary at this point. It's something that everybody talks about and everybody can get an image in their head whenever they think of Friday the 13th, even today. And we're talking about a movie that was made in 1980, and you can go up to a teenager today, my nephew who's 12 years older, my son who's 7 years old, they know who Jason Voorhees is. It's probably not a good thing, but they know who he is.
I mean, that's about the age I learned about him, man. We're in the age of the internet, so eventually someone's going to find out.
Right. But if I try to tell my kid who Maxwell Smart was, he'd look at me like I was absolutely insane.
Yeah. I absolutely hear that argument. And at this point, we're going along so far in human history that Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, they used to be kind of other and more modern than like a Wolfman or Frankenstein or Dracula. They're really not anymore. They're really kind of in that same echelon of they're now classic movie monsters.
Right.
And so they're just kind of in the iconography. And I've been using that word a lot. I do that. I'll be like, I like the way that word sounds off my tongue. I'm going to keep using it. Like perpetually was like heroin for me the entirety of spring 2019. I think it's a very important movie. Just from what I enjoy in my movies, I really enjoyed the Nude Bomb. And
but this isn't your sour scale. This is my sour scale. So
oh my God, are you that insecure about your sour scale? I was providing a retort, not a defense.
Can I finish? Can I finish?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm finished. Little South Park reference for you guys. So yeah, no, so my sour scale is going to differ from yours a little bit. My sour scale, I put Friday the 13th at number one. That's probably the best film that we're going to get on this podcast, hands down. I know what the other three films are we got coming up, and I can tell you for certain that this one's not going to move. This is going to be my forever number one. Number two.
I'm sorry, I let you finish.
Can I finish?
I let you finish.
Number two, we'll do the nude bomb. Number three would probably be Xanadu. Number four will be Saturn 3, I believe. Number five, I would probably put Raise the Titanic. Six would probably have to be The Jazz Singer at this point. And then seven would have to be Windows, which is probably going to end up being my dead last. We got three more films to do for the year of 1980 before we move on to a new year. And honestly, I don't think there's much going to change. I think we're going to be playing a lot with the middle, but I think my top movie and my choice for worst movie are pretty much set. I don't know about you.
That is exactly how I feel, because the only movie that I can predict that's coming up in the next couple of weeks is going to be Cruising. That's the only one I've seen, and I very distinctly do not like it. And I can probably place the hard one is going to be that and The Jazz Singer, because I hate those very intensely for very different reasons. So that'll be a battle I'll have to have with myself, but we'll get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So
absolutely.
Are there any of the tidbits? Are there any other Jason Voorhees, if you will?
Not that I can remember at this point in time. If you get a shot at it, definitely watch the Movies That Made Us episode about Friday the 13th. It's definitely worth the watch. It's kind of a crash course in filmmaking, because that's exactly how they made this. I mean, it was guerrilla filmmaking at its finest. It's definitely something worth looking into. And that's why we do this podcast, is to figure out the do's and don'ts. So this one is a definite do. Like, definitely do practical effects, definitely do stuff that is going to shock and awe the audience. Think of your scores. You know, your score is a very important part of a film, and this film is a true example of that. I mean, as the score has lived just as long as the film itself. It is synonymous with the film. It's synonymous with the holiday of Halloween. I mean, you go to any haunted house, you're going to hear that at some point. With that being said, I think we have reached the end of this film. So we're going to go to our last segment, which we like to affectionately refer to as Plugs, Not Drugs. Man, fuck these drugs. I think it's time we spread some plugs. Got those plugs? Hey man, let me get some of them plugs. I'd sell you this baby for a plug.
I'm on some mushrooms. There's a guy in the corner. Don't take me under the stairs. I don't want to go. No, I don't want to go. Mr. Mustache, put your balls away. I really want to stay in the living room.
And that's definitely making the cut.
Okay. I'll accept that one. That's your one.
So in Plugs Not Drugs, we bring this in for a landing. We just let you know about everything we have going on outside of this podcast. Anything that we have coming up that we just want to let you guys know about. Karen, you got anything to plug, bud?
Let's see, just the typical stuff. Radio War, RADIOWORE. Card Marks will be returning in November. So be on the lookout for season 2. Justice was in a play, so that's what we've been waiting for. It was Dracula. It was pretty good. He did a really good job. He played Jonathan Harker. That's Keanu Reeves in the Gary Oldman movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, from what I know, what's happening in wrestling right now, y'all definitely got a lot to talk about. So,
yeah, we decided to break right before like Sasha and Naomi left, which was like right when everything started going. But anywho, that's a bit more niche, but follow Card Marks, listen to the old back catalog. We got an interview, we got a game show in there, we got some topics, rebookings. It's a fun time. There's about 3 hours worth of content there for you. It's all yours. But anyway, Radio Work, Card Marks, typical stuff. Shop all the Rod and Reels merch. We need your money. Follow all the Rod and Reels productions. We need your money, and we love you. Here's my heart. Take it. Bye-bye.
I don't really have a lot going on with the plugs. Definitely get out there. We are currently in pre-production for our short film Campfire Cravings. We had to take a little bit of a detour on that one. We have reworked the script a little bit to make it a little bit more feasible with the production budget that we have. And honestly, I'm super excited about it. I think taking another couple passes on that script really honed in on it, and I think we've come up with something even better than before. So I am super excited about getting that started. Once we get done with pre-production, we'll probably take a break for the holidays, and then we will start production probably in February, March time, because it is going to be set outside. So we want to make sure that it's not freezing cold or blistering hot. So we want to try to make it in the springtime if we can. In the meantime, though, we still have this podcast going on, and we will continue to bring this podcast to you every couple of weeks. We have 3 more episodes left in 1980. We have Cruisin', The Formula, and the supposed winner of the Golden Raspberry of 1980. It's Can't Stop the Music, which is the Village People movie, which I've never actually seen before, and I'm kind of excited to get to because it won the award. So I am stoked to see what actually happened, because none of these guys that are in this film are actors in any way, shape, or form.
I am also intrigued by that because there's some real heavy hitters as far as bad movies in this. So if you can be blackface and killer lesbians, that's probably a pretty low bar, or they were just wrong. And because when you say Village People movie, I'm actually a little excited.
Right. It's at least going to be a good time. I feel like it's going to be in the same category as Xanadu, where it's like, it's terrible, but it's a good time.
It's probably just hearing Village People movie, I'm probably like, that's probably a 5.
Right.
Maybe a 4.
All right. Well, that's for another podcast on another day. Like Kieran had said, please go out and shop our merch. We have a whole bunch of Rod and Reels merch. We have a couple Raspberry Fields shirts out there. You can also get coffee mugs. You can get phone covers, whatever the hell you want. Please get out there and get it. All the proceeds go towards the making of our newest content, our next short film, our next podcast, whatever. It all goes towards that. So any and all help is appreciated. With that being said, I don't think there's anything else that I have left to plug. Kieran, do you have anything, sir?
No, I just can't believe you said a swear word. Shame on you.
I've swore on this podcast several times.
Oh, I this must be the first time I know. Like that's just very tacky. You shouldn't swear.
Fuck it. Soiled it. All right. So that's the end of this podcast. I'm Jesse Rodden.
I'm Kieran Gibbs.
And that's all the berries worth picking. We'll see you in the fields next week. Thank you guys so much for coming. Happy Halloween. Bye for now. You've been listening to Raspberry Fields Forever, a Rod and Reels podcast. Available on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you receive your podcast. You can go to the website www.rodandreels.com for even more content. Thanks for listening.
Get off the stage already!